Hello and welcome to the show. Does carbon trading work, or is it failing to fight global warming as everyone hoped it would? The system of trading emissions was touted as a key tool in the fight to reducing greenhouse gases, but now some experts believe it could be counterproductive. Under this scheme, companies exceeding their pollution limits can buy carbon credits from those that have stayed below their targets. Most often, big polluters in the West buy extra credit from companies in developing nations. And critics say that in doing so, they're avoiding cleaning up their act. Naturally, supporters of the market system argue that it's the most effective way to reduce emissions. Whatever the view, one thing that everyone can agree on is that trade in carbon emissions will only increase even as renewable energy sources are being developed. Well, last year the market was worth $60 billion, and some industry experts have that rising to $2 trillion by 2020. On today's show, we're asking who wins and who loses with carbon trading. You can let us know what you think by contacting us at the numbers at the bottom of your screen. Joining me from our London studios to discuss this issue is Larry Lohman from the environmental think tank Corner House. He believes the carbon credit scheme has failed. Mr. Lohman's also author of Carbon Trading, a critical conversation on climate change, privatization and power. And from the Embankment studios in London, we're joined by Imtiaz Ahmed, who's a carbon trader at Morgan Stanley. He was an early mover within the industry and began trading before the major carbon exchanges were even set up. Also with us is David Hunter, the Director of US Policy for the International Emissions Trading Association, which works to develop the carbon trading market as a means to reducing pollution. I welcome you all to the show. Larry Lohman, in London, I'd like to start with you and ask you, in a nutshell, what you believe to be the problem with the carbon emission trading system. Where's it gone wrong?
The problem is really that carbon trading just keeps the wheels on the fossil fuel system. In the 10 years or so that the carbon markets have really been active, they've done nothing except actually encourage more investment in fossil fuels. And as we all know, fossil fuels is the central problem of climate change. If we're going to solve the climate problem, we really have to keep most remaining fossil fuels in the ground. That's no longer even controversial in scientific circles. And carbon trading is not doing this. It's actually offering reasons for delay for some of the worst carbon offenders. Some of the most fossil fuel intensive industries are actually getting incentives to delay or to buy their way out of making the reductions in the use of fossil fuels that they need to make. So it's actually not actually doing what it's supposed to do.
Well, I wonder, Mr. Lohman, do you advocate something completely different, or is there a way to fix the system so it is actually more effective and can achieve what people hoped it would?
I would say that the market is actually designed in a way which keeps the wheels on the fossil fuel industry, which it offers possibilities for delay, and that's exactly the last thing we need, because we need to start undertaking the structural shifts in the way we do things, in the way we organize our energy systems, and the way we organize transport right away, because the longer we wait, the more expensive and the more difficult and the more painful and the more dangerous it's going to be. I think there are lots of alternatives waiting in the wings, just waiting for carbon trading to get out of the way, so that they can actually take a more effective role in fighting climate change. All you have to do actually is ask the California environmental justice movement, who are working very hard to stop 21 new fossil fuel-fired power plants for their state, and they feel that carbon trading is getting in their way. They want to stop carbon trading because they feel that would give these plants a reason or an incentive to be built. I'll
look at some of those alternatives you're suggesting in a moment, or at least that you've mentioned in a moment. Let me bring in David Hunter of the International Emissions Trading Association here in the US. I'm glad you could join us, by the way.
Thank you, Riz.
And I have to ask you, I mean, I know you don't think necessarily the system is perfect, but obviously you see it as a way that can move things forward positively.
Absolutely. I think emissions trading is actually one of the big environmental success stories of our time. And the way it first started out is on the acid rain program. And if they had not done emissions trading, had not put in place a cap and trade, then it would have cost far more and to get a not as good an environmental result. And cap and trade is just in its very initial stages. It has not yet started in the United States, hasn't started around most of the world. They are doing it in Europe. I think they have found some initial positive success stories in Europe, but ultimately, if you want to reduce emissions, and get the best environmental target for the least cost to society, emissions trading is a clear answer.
Of course, America has to be a leader as far as many people are concerned, and the fact that America isn't fully engaged must be a major obstacle to making this thing move forward. To what extent are American companies, many of whom are multinational, to what extent are they engaged?
Well, I can speak a little bit for our companies. AIDA has 180 member companies. They span all different all across the spectrum of markets. And these are companies that are looking now to get the U.S. to move. They are looking to set up a cap and trade program in the United States. AIDA supports the goals of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change for reducing emissions, and thinks that cap and trade is the best way to do that. So I'm hoping that we will be able to set up such a program in the U.S. soon.
Can I put an email question we got from Paul in London to you? Paul wrote in saying the only way to get the big polluting industries to change their ways is to hurt them in the pocket. Carbon trading's fine, but it hasn't been implemented properly, and it's cheaper for companies to buy credits than to clean up their act. Isn't that a valid criticism that wealthy nations and wealthy companies can effectively dismiss their responsibility by buying out the credits?
Well, I would agree with one portion of what Paul said, was that in order to get companies to move, you have to hit them in the pocketbook. But the thing to realize right now is that carbon is free. In the United States, in China, in India, in most of the world, people can emit as much carbon as they want for no cost at all. And so what you have to do, the first thing you have to do is put a price on carbon. And that price, it should ratchet up over time, and as it does, it will hit companies in the pocketbooks more and more and more. And initially they may decide, yes, we'll try to buy credits in somewhere where they're cheaper, but eventually, after they keep buying credits over and over and over again, they have to reduce emissions, and seeing a long-term price in carbon will give those companies the encouragement to make the long-term decisions, the investment decisions to reduce emissions.
Let's bring in Imtiaz Ahmed, and Imtiaz, you're an early mover in this market here. I'm curious, what made you look at carbon trading as a way forward? You know, what made you become one of the early movers?
Well, Rosa, at the time I was working for BHP Billiton, the natural resources company, and I started to understand the implications of carbon trading and relating to the commodities, the fossil fuel commodities, coal, gas, power, and indeed renewable energy. I myself come from an electricity power generating background, utilities, energy trading. And I think carbon trading plays a key role in sending incentive signals. Absolutely, the words expressed by David, which is putting a price on carbon, is very important. When utilities, when power generators, who emit much of the emissions in the EU, in the US and elsewhere, when they actually start to see a price on carbon and allocate that into their generation decisions, then you start to see shifts in behaviour and investment decisions. And this is where carbon trading plays a key role. It is true that in the early period of the EU, there was a lack of data put in place in a test period called Phase 1, which was the 05 to 07 period. And that predated the Kyoto emissions trading period. We're currently now at the start of the Kyoto emissions trading period, 08 to 12. And much of the shortage has been put on electricity generation. And we're starting to see them take account of carbon in their decisions day to day when they decide what kinds of electricity generation they dispatch. And that's a pure example of carbon trading actually working.
Now, Imtiaz, I wonder, you know, with the projections, that $60 billion is a huge amount already to be trading, and the estimates going up to $2 trillion being traded in carbon emissions by 2020. From your perspective, is that a realistic figure?
It certainly can be realistic. The key thing to recall, and again I'm echoing David's sentiment, is that right now the only cap and trade system that actually exists in the world is in the EU emission trading scheme, in terms of carbon dioxide emissions. So yes, Japan is also adhering to its Kyoto targets, but through a voluntary system. And so as this system expands, if we see after the next US presidential elections, whether it's Senator John McCain, Senator Hillary Clinton, or Senator Barack Obama, if a federal system emerges in the US for cap and trade, and it's interlinked with the EU system, and Australia implements one, and New Zealand and Japan, then we have the chance for an interlinked system that could emerge as a very large global market. Right. And this is actually a good thing, because then it starts to send incentive signals around the world. It creates more efficient markets with a price for carbon that's sent around the world. And global warming, by definition, is a global issue, and so it does need a global solution.
Well, Larry Lohmann, you know, you've said that the carbon trading system, from your perspective, is an obstacle to other alternatives that, you know, you feel would be more effective. Give us an idea on what you feel would be more effective.
Well, for example, in California, the California environmental justice groups are pushing for a renewable portfolio standard. They're pushing for massive investment in the creation of a new green economy, providing green jobs for people, underprivileged people, particularly in the poorer communities of color who are most deeply affected by the fossil fuel economy. You know, I visited communities around the world, in Europe, in India, in North America recently. There are all sorts of initiatives going on at the municipal level, at the state level, at the local level, in order to cut emissions, to get out of fossil fuels. And some of these local initiatives are actually very far ahead of the national and the international initiatives. And I think these initiatives actually are going to be blocked by some of the carbon trading schemes which are going on. I mean, even here in Europe, you see the UK government's own attempts to support renewable energy being actually undercut by the carbon market. The argument is that, well, you know, that if we provide support, if we provide subsidies for renewable energy development, that will damage the development of the carbon market in London, in the city of London, and so forth. So I think there's a real problem here. I mean, there are so many initiatives, you know, shifting of subsidies, massive investment in a different structural way of doing things in terms of transport, in terms of energy production. These are the things that we need to be expending our resources on, rather than these carbon trading systems, which actually do not provide the right kind of incentive. I mean, earlier David and your other guests were talking about the price incentive, but price is actually not a very good incentive for dealing with the particular global warming problem. Well, for one thing, the prices so far in all trading schemes so far have been derisory. For another thing, prices actually are not predictable.
I've got to trouble you just to pause for a second. We have a lot more to debate, but we have to take a very short break here. Please stay with us, all of you. We'll have more on our discussion on carbon emissions trading in just a moment. Let us know your views on this topic by calling us at the number on the screen.